and welcome to my channel. I am Nakio Yamushi, and if you saw the title of this video, you probably realized that it's anatomy tips for artists. Yippee! Shout out to the follower that gave me this request. Anatomy. It's difficult. Wah, wah. But hopefully today I'll be able to give you some tips that will help you on your artistic journey to figuring out what is the human form. In my research for this video, I watched a fair amount of videos myself. Me personally, I did not find them helpful, and I didn't really find them useful either. Controversial opinion! Sorry guys! The reason that I didn't find these helpful is the same reason why I haven't ever found anatomy books for artists helpful. They break down the human form into homogeneous shapes, like circles, squares, triangles, hexagons, trapezoids, whatever. I don't find that helpful because the human being is not a bunch of shapes stacked on top of each other. I mean, could you imagine if we were little Minecraft beings? That would be crazy. All right, Nakio Yamushi, if you're so freaking smart, how did you learn anatomy then? I am so glad you asked, my friends. There's two ways I learned anatomy. I'm mostly a self-taught artist, but I have taken exactly 3 college courses on art. The third and final one that I took was a life drawing class with nude models. So actually having a human being in front of me without any clothing, that was the first way that actually helped me. Because, you know, I saw the human form in its entirety. The second thing that helped me was learning shading. And I actually learned shading years later. There was a huge gap in my progression. If you're serious about progressing in your artistic journey, I would highly, highly recommend taking a life drawing class with nude models. Now, if you don't have a local community college near you, you can't afford it, blah, 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 whatever reason, ask your friends. If your friends are friends with an artist, they'll get artists asking for weird things. And if your friends aren't comfortable with nudity, have them wear a bathing suit. Better than nothing, right? But if you absolutely don't have money for a life drawing class, you don't have friends, and you really, really just want to hear me keep on talking, let me give you some pointers.
Alright, so I thought the easiest way to show body proportions was to physically show my own butt. Hey, Brutus. Brutus, get out of the shot. Brutus. He's 7 months old and he listens to absolutely nothing. I'm just gonna move. Okay, finally he's moving. Okay, first thing to remember is the halfway point in the body. The halfway point is right here around the pelvis and crotch area. Your legs are half, your top part is the other half. Just about. Let's go over the basic sections. Head, shoulder, head, your neck, your shoulders, the chest area, your stomach, pelvis, crotch area, your legs being your femur, your knees, and then your shins. I'm gonna pull it up so you can see my big juicy calf. Disgusting, I'm so sorry to burn your eyes. Better take off my shoe, losing my balance, that's horrible. Then you got your ankle and your foot. Awesome. We are not just a skeletal structure, we have muscles, okay? And the muscles make a certain shape, okay? It's a nice round shape.
Hi, Tan.
Also, your hands start where your butt ends. Let's go over your arms. Yippee. You've got the top one, which is your humerus bone with your bicep and tricep and things I can't use. Then you've got your elbow, and then you have your forearm, which consists of 2 bones, the radius and the ulna, that if you look, those 2 literally flip places when you move your arm. And then you've got the hand. Good job, now we know the body. I screenshotted and crudely drew over. There's just some things that I want to point out. There's no actual straight line in the body. Your muscles are on the bones and they're built their own way. So you need to learn the shape of it. Like my thigh, I see that, okay, I've got a little bit of a thicker thigh and I've got thicker calves. So I would compensate for that when I'm drawing because there's a very distinct line from your calf going down to your ankle. Nobody has just straight legs. That's not real. But noticing where the muscles protrude and where they connect, that's what's going to help you make something look more realistic. And if realistic isn't your goal, it'll make it more believable. Brutus is peeing, but I would recommend you take a picture of yourself and do what I just did so you can get familiar with the human form. I say to use yourself as a model because every single body is different, and just using a diagram, frankly, isn't helpful. It doesn't compensate for these differences. And as much as I love anime, not everyone is standardized sizes. Art is about training your eye to see. Looking and seeing are two different things. Looking is just to direct your eye in a specified direction, while seeing is to perceive with your eyes or discern visually. It's basically you discerning and trying to understand given information. That's why general circles and shapes don't work. Looking at someone for their own body and proportions and the way the light falls on them, that's what helps. And that's why shading helped me so much when I was learning anatomy. I began to identify what was a shadow versus what was actually part of the figure. For example, you're always going to have a shadow under your nose because it protrudes out of your face. Speaking of noses, let's move on to facial proportions. So here's a super duper general diagram. Assuming that somebody has an absolutely symmetrical face. As you can see, it's kind of split into thirds. Let's see if that works on my face. Hold on. I have never looked sexier. The lines confuse me. So the way that I look at it is that the inside corner of each of the eyes tend to match up with the end of the nose. And then the edge of the nose will more or less match up with the mouth. I found this one varies the most because some people have a lot bigger mouths than I do. I know, I talk a lot. Not what I meant. Again, I remind that we have to look at everything as a whole, okay? So we start at the top with the eyebrows, then the eyes, then the nose, then the mouth, but above the mouth is the Cupid's bow, which we love to highlight when doing your makeup. Ask Jeffree Star. And the chin. And of course the cheekbones. Everybody's cheekbones, they have them, just some aren't as pronounced. For example, you can really only see mine at certain random weird angles, but I still have them. Damn you, Benedict Cumberbatch. You'll have an easier time learning facial proportions if you practice by using people who have distinctly different facial features. For example, Taylor Swift versus Selena Gomez. This is an exercise I would recommend doing for anybody who's trying to figure out facial proportions. Physically print out a picture of whoever you want to draw, and then take a Sharpie and outline their facial features. Notice their facial features and then use this as your guide for when you go and do your sketch. Something I immediately notice is that their nose shapes are quite different. Taylor's got a much narrower nose while Selena's is a little bit wider, especially at the bottom. And here's a really important tip whenever you're drawing a face. I recommend starting with the nose because that's really the center of the face, and then building the features out from there. Sometimes I get distracted and I really want to draw the eyes because the eyes are super duper pretty, and then I just cannot center the face. It is always off. So start with the nose. Taylor's lips are a little bit plumper, if you will, and she's got a little more of a point at the top. Selena's are a little bit wider. And then the eyes, Selena's eyes look slightly bigger, and her eyebrows are a little bit more pronounced. Selena's face is a little bit wider. I didn't draw in where the cheekbones are, but that's something that you could do if you wanted to do this exercise. The more you study different facial features, the easier it will be to find nuance in it. And once you understand the nuance, you'll find out what features you want to highlight or you find the most beautiful in the face. Stylization and your prerogative as an artist. I have a set of twins in my family, and I remember when they were really little, I could not tell them apart. But I spent more time with them, and I actually kept on looking at pictures of them trying to memorize their facial features. And after doing that, I was able to be like, okay, this is that twin, that's the other twin, even though they're identical, and my brain is like, what? I actually had this same reaction when I first started listening to K-pop, because when I would look at the different band members, I went, wait, but they all look the same. My brain. Part of the struggle in identifying them is that they're all changing their look and their outfits and their hair so much that it's hard when you initially start listening to actually keep a beat on who's who. But through repeated exposure and studying their faces way more than any human being probably should, I now know that Lino has the highest cheekbones of the members, and no matter how many frickin' times I draw Bangchan's face, it still doesn't get any easier. Great, so now we've moved on to the portion of the video where I'm going to give you some techniques that are actually going to help you in the drawing process. The first technique is to do a gesture drawing. If you've noticed, Most artists, before they start their sketch, they start it with a gesture drawing. Now, in my research for this video, I actually learned something new. I have apparently been using gesture drawings incorrectly. If there's such a thing as using an art technique incorrectly. There probably is. But this one, hear me out. According to Google, a gesture drawing is a quick, dynamic sketching method focused on capturing the essence of a subject's movement, energy, or pose rather than detailed rendering. I use the gesture drawing a different way. I use it to find its placement on the page and find where it will be in the space. And then once I have it placed on the page, I check and see where I kind of got the proportions incorrect. Simply stated, I use the gesture drawing to help me find its placement in space and also figure out proportions. This helps me look at the figure as a whole rather than honing in on one part and making it look disproportionate. Because remember, the goal when you're drawing is you want to make everything look balanced, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be accurate to reality, but it does have to make sense within the parameters of what you're making. The next exercise I would recommend is one that I absolutely hate, and it's called negative space. Hi, Brutus. Thanks for being there for us. All this means is that you're drawing everything around the object, but not the object itself. Doesn't sound too inherently difficult. I mean, if you're doing something small, like a ball. Hello, hello, hello. Oh, na, 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 na. A simple shape probably isn't that hard because you're just going around the circle. But what happens when you get something like a plant? Yeah, not so easy then. This exercise is really helpful though because it teaches you to look at the object as a whole and also to take into account the background. This can be very time consuming, but the end result is definitely rewarding because it does look kind of cool, and then you can always go back in with a different color and fill in the object afterwards. It's really a good exercise. The thing to keep in mind when you're going to do a negative space drawing though is that you want the object to be complicated because you want to challenge your eye. Oh my god, it looks so bad. All right, so let's move on to our last exercise, and that is gridding. Gridding is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to be making a grid on your reference photo, and then you're going to be making it in your sketchbook, and you will be transferring it by way of looking and drawing it. I use this technique when I have a particular reference image that I've tried to draw several times, and it's just odd enough that I can't quite get it. Because remember, the human body has movement and sometimes it just makes weird shapes. Assuming you're using an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, I would recommend doing 1-inch boxes. And keep in mind if you have any size differences between the reference sheet of paper and your actual sketchbook, sorry, you might have to do a little bit of math. So you print out your reference image, you grid it, and then you number each of the boxes, and then you do the same steps in your sketchbook. Tracing the outline of where the figure is supposed to go is going to be a little bit trippy because I can guarantee in most cases it's going to feel like it's a little bit smaller than it should be. I attribute this to the fact that we tend to only look at the figure and not at the background, right? You could also pencil in the background, but I don't have time for that in my sketchbook. I don't think this is a be-all, end-all technique, but it's good for helping your eye, and it's especially good for helping you when you're stuck. It kind of breaks everything down, but still forces you to look at it as a whole. Okay, after having explained that technique, I do have a piece of advice that I think is super crucial, that I know that there are a lot of artists who won't agree with me on this, but I don't think that anybody should ever sketch on the computer. What? What do you mean? Okay, let me explain. So I bought this sketchbook while I was living in Austria, and it has some of my proudest sketches in it. This was before I really understood what shading was, so I was really just trying to understand the human form. And if you'll notice around the hands, that's not shading there, friends. That's from me erasing and struggling with the paper so much that it literally couldn't get the graphite out. And out of that struggle with the paper was born this drawing that I'm really proud of. The struggle is important. It creates muscle memory and gives you a greater appreciation for what you're creating. Because if you have to keep on erasing it and drawing it over and over again, when you're finally done and finally happy with it, you're like, wow, I actually accomplished that. But I also say that you need to actually physically sketch on a piece of paper, because if you want to recreate reality, You need to be grounded in it. And sure, it's a lot easier and a lot less messy to click Control-Z on a computer, but at the end of the day, you're not gonna have as strong a relationship with that piece as you would if you'd physically drawn it. And look, I know every single artist has their own process. I'm just giving you a piece of advice that has helped me. And in an age where technology is dominating everything, it's really important to hold fast to our roots. You've reached the end, my friends. Let's review what we learned. First and foremost, we went over basic body proportions, right? The thing that I want you to remember is that everybody is different and you need to study how everything connects and works together as a whole. Then we reviewed facial proportions and we went on a deep dive featuring Selena Gomez and Taylor Swift. The other thing that I think is really crucial when you're working on the face, remember, we start with the nose and then we work out, right? Nose is the center. Then we went over 3 techniques that should hopefully help you on your journey to figuring out the human form. The first one being gesture drawing, the second one being negative space, and the third one, gridding. And my biggest piece of advice is to sketch on a piece of paper. Absolutely create digital art, but the sketch should be physical. I hope these tips and techniques will help you. Every single artist has their own journey that they're on, and we really have to kind of figure it out ourselves. But I think that's what makes it so beautiful. If any of what I said helps you on that journey, I am honored. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.